Greetings, dear friends. I present to your attention the most common malfunctions and breakdowns that occur on the Volkswagen Tiguan. The front MacPherson steerings of the Tiguan are quite resourceful. If you do not get carried away with all terrain and drive on good roads or choose the right trajectory, then almost all components will live up to almost hundreds of thousands of mileage. Previously, only the anti-roll bar links and the rear arm support were rented. After this milestone, everything will have to be shaken up globally, preferably with the replacement of the silent blocks of the subframe. And if you don't want to get into the suspension again with runs of 130 to 150, then with the replacement of supports and shock absorbers at the same time. And do not forget to prepare a set of bolts. Traditionally for Volkswagen, they are made of plasticine, moreover rusting. For those who like to attack the curbs and pits outright, the rear support of the front lever suffers greatly. Tuning with the installation of a solid support from the Audi Q3 RS and other reinforced options is still popular, but it drastically reduces comfort due to the very detailed transfer of all road trifles to the body and steering. It is interesting that the lever itself and the ball joint may well go over the shock absorbers, which for many quite live up to 200,000 mileage, if you don't not find the fault with the taxiing. From the nuances, it is also worth remembering that a lot of unnecessary noise is associated with an anti-roll bar. The cyclists play in its bushings, and in the cabin there is a complete feeling of a completely collapsed suspension, and they officially change only in the collection. In practice, we have mastered the installation on glue and with a hand-made bracket, which allows you to clamp the germ of the liner well. And one more thing. The condition of the springs is very important for the resource of the stabilizer, and at the Tiguan they sag by a few centimeters by 5 years of operation almost always. The rear suspension is noticeably more complex than the front one, and its resource is highly dependent on the average load. However, empty cars with urban operation, the suspension walks and walks, but those who really use the capabilities of crossover to transport goods and passengers may be unhappy. The first knocks begin after 50,000, but are usually eliminated by replacing the stabilizer struts and the lower outer ball bearings. There are also floating silent blocks in garage terminology. Often an incorrectly installed anti-roll bar link and broken fasteners create a good basis for expensive and frequent repairs in the future, and the subsidence of the spring to the progressive certification of the trailing arm silent block. As a result, even neat owners almost certainly have to undergo major repairs for hundreds of thousands, rarely who can postpone it for 120 to 150 runs, unless they drive purely on a highway with very good asphalt. Large repairs for the rear suspension, this is about 100 to 130 euros of spare parts, including the silent blocks of the upper curved lever, lower support arm, trailing arm, subframe, as well as the rear stabilizer bar bushings, its rods, brake-up bolts, and almost all other fasteners. The work will take about the same amount. It is also advisable to replace the springs, they also actively sag. Those who like to load a car with the top may even break off extreme turns. The resource of wheel bearings is now quite decent, and in cars before restyling they often begin to howl with runs up to 50, mostly let down the rear ones. Now the problem concerns only cars on non-standard tires with long reach and miraculously preserved low-run durst, cars with native bearings. The steering with EUR is generally not whimsical. The rails on the Tiguan are normally produced by the VW APA BS series with a belt in the drive. If the antennas of the rail are intact, the amplifier software is updated on time, then it does not cause trouble until runs of the order of 200,000. True, it is very sensitive to the quality of the onboard power supply. For example, a tired battery is the cause of most failures. Breakdowns of the rail itself are usually associated with a breakdown of the torque sensor or a wedging power drive due to the ingress of dirt and water. The life of the screw ball nut pair in the power actuator depends on the loads, and it is limited in general. With poor lubrication in machines from hot regions, grease often leaks through the antennas, and in very cold regions it freezes. Or water gets in, Noise and vibration appear during operation, and then the motor starts to shut down due to overheating or overload, or breaks the drive belt. It is considered good form to change the grease in the rail with runs of the order of 100,000 to prevent problems in the future. But, as usual, only a few service the car, and there is usually no confidence in the mileage. The bulk of our cars are all-wheel drive, but front-wheel drive is about a quarter of the population. There are no serious miscalculations in the design, and everything is fine with spare parts. There is a large selection of both new and used parts. The bulk of CV joint breakdowns are associated with damaged covers. The second group of troubles concerns those who have a 2.0 engine hot up to 300 plus forces and 400 plus torque. The launch is on the durability of the drives and the propeller shaft is corny, but their loud voice should not be taken into account. Those who are engaged in tuning point-wise and not comprehensively are, in simple terms, to blame. 6-speed manual gearboxes are quite strong, but they are rarely found, mainly with 1.4 engines, where their margin of safety is enormous. The main problem is related to the dual-mass flywheel and its resource. There are cars where the flywheel knocks with mileage in the region of 100,000, but there is little confidence in its authenticity. As a rule, problems in this area overtake closer to 200,000. The section with automatic machines will have to be shortened. They are far from lasting, if you do not change the oil often and leave the stock cooling system. But in the presence of a normal radiator instead of a heat exchanger, an external filter and with frequent oil changes, the resource can please old school lovers. It easily passes its 350 plus, even if you make improvements at the first calls or after the first repair of the valve body with runs of the order of 100 to 120,000. For cars with maintenance strictly according to the regulations and with urban operation, you can count only on these very 100 to 120,000 of normal operation. Further jerks and mistakes will inevitably begin. And it's good if you only have to clean the valve body and clean or replace the most loaded solenoids. Indeed, often on overheated automatic transmissions, the rubber piston tears, and this will require more serious repairs. Reselective robots here only with clutches in an oil bath, DQ250 and DQ500. They were installed on the Tiguan mainly after restyling. By the way, on the Tiguan there are rare variants of these boxes under the bell of 1.4 TSI engines, which are very much appreciated by fans of tuning any Volkswagen cars to replace the dry DQ200. It is clear that such options are in short supply, but in general, the preselectives of this series lend themselves well to repair. Let's start with the newer and more powerful automatic transmission, the 7-speed DQ500. On the Tiguan, they are only used in 4-wheel drive versions, which are designated OBH or ODL. This 7-speed robot originally appeared with powerful diesel engines, but by the time the Tiguan was restyled, they began to install it with much less torque motors. The reason is both in the general high resource of the clutches and the mechanical part, as well as in the more convenient gear ratios for driving in city mode. After all, 6 gears for a robotic automatic transmission with a powerful motor turn out to be not enough. Either the revs are overestimated when driving at speeds of 110 to 130 km per hour, or too large a gear ratio at the start causes high wear on the clutches. These boxes are considered very reliable. On commercial vehicles, they often do not require replacement of clutches up to 250 to 300,000 km. And, with the regular oil and filter changes, they serve quite reliably. But with mass use on cars, there are more problems, not least because of the higher temperature when working in tandem with gasoline engines and because of the many fans of tuning EA888 and EA189 series motors. Boxes produced between 5/27 2013 and 11/14 2014 have a problem with the third gear synchronizer locking ring, which should be eliminated with the warranty or coolant. The date of manufacture of the box is written directly on its case, in the front upper part of the clutch housing. Noise when switching from second or fourth gear to the third is an unambiguous reason to replace the box. The problem with the third gear synchronizer, not directly related to the aforementioned ring defect, is one of the most popular gearbox problems. Moreover, the search for a solution to the problem is clearly led by the manufacturer himself. The structural element has changed significantly since 2010. The first, second, and third gears are most powerful here and used as often as possible, while the second and first have almost no quick downshifts, and there the synchronizers are less loaded, as in the fourth. And the material on the first three cone versions is brass, which made it possible to make the gear engaging faster, but reduced the resource of the synchronizer. In the future, the synchronizer became steel single cone, and the resource obviously increased. Fork bearings are a serious problem. As in the first revision of the dry DSG DQ200, they are made with bearings that have balls and a bad habit of falling apart, crushing the mechanics when the ball hits it. The increased load due to problems with the third gear synchronizer causes very frequent problems with the third to seventh fork, but the rest can fail. It's just that this is the most loaded. Another unpleasant problem is related to the shafting of the oil supply pipe due to the slightest backlash in the differential bearings. A frayed tube very quickly leads to problems with the lubrication of the clutch package and the ingress of a huge amount of steel chips from the rings into the oil system. The differential can hardly be called weak at the same time, but it is easy to fault it when forcing the motor and annealing. On the mechanical side, the box has practically no serious drawbacks. Improved oil pump, increased adhesion, optimized lubrication system with reduced consumption due to lubrication of only the currently loaded shaft, improved filtration and overall optimization of mechatronics compared to the previous DQ250 transmission, made it possible to create a very robust gearbox with hydraulic costs of less than 3 kW at the largest load. But, unfortunately, all the shortcomings of the idea itself are present. The oil in this automatic transmission acts both as a working medium of the hydraulic system and as a lubricating and cooling component for the mechanical part. Of course, the accumulation of wear products of the mechanical part in the hydraulic fluid negatively affects the operation of the hydraulics, and here the wear products are not only the clutch cardboard, but also wear elements of synchronizers, gear clutches, and the shaft themselves. Many of the components of such debris are magnets, which means they have a significant effect on the operation of the solenoids. Of course, the box has many catching magnets both on the body of the internal filter and in other parts, as many as 2 filters and 1 external replaceable one, but this does not completely solve the problem of oil saturation with wear products, especially if you adhere to the official service regulations every 60,000. The widespread use of plastic in the design of mechatronics makes it extremely sensitive to work with extended overheating. The wiring is made in the form of a loop in boxes, and over time, the plastic becomes more fragile, and this increases the chances of breakage both during assembly and disassembly of the box and during operation. In theory, additives should be present in the oil to prevent aging of the plastic, but in practice, the older the box, the higher the chances of damage to continental and electronic components. There are special additives that reduce the chances of plastic breakage in such conditions, but pouring them into box oil is somewhat dangerous. So usually mechatronics are treated with special compounds only with disassembled. In addition to plastic, rubber seals are also aging, of which there are many in hydraulics. Plungers in mechatronics have a bad habit of bullying when handling dirty oil, and if the solenoids can be simply replaced, then the plungers will have to be replaced with repair ones, with complex work on channel boring or with the installation of repair sleeves. Unlike solenoids, plungers can be pulled out onto a standard hydraulic stand. You will have to install special adapters. A visual inspection may not reveal specific problems such as a change in the geometry of the plunger without scoring. It is because of such cases that sometimes the mechatronics have to be changed in the assembly. The exchange found for these mechatronics is 1.5 to 2 times more expensive than for the DQ200 and starts at €220, and the compatibility of different options is worse, but they repaired better and cheaper. And don't forget that there is another important component, the engine's dual-mass flywheel. This is also a wearing component, and it is he who is responsible for many unpleasant knocks during the operation of the DQ500. Low engine speed contributes to early engine wear. A high torque of tuning motors is also. Often quite strong jerks, and jerks when shifting at low speeds are the result of wear on the flywheel, and not on the DSG itself. What is nice? The box is well diagnosed. If we are talking about a VCDS mass scanner, then you can see the operating time of the automatic transmission at different temperatures, in the ranges of 0 to 90, 90 to 110, 110 to 120, 120 to 130, 130 to 140, and the maximum oil temperature. The number of temperature rises is 170 and 160 degrees. You can see the travels of the forks for engaging gears. It should be 8 mm, as on its predecessor, and deviations are not good. Either the forks are worn out or the synchronizers are worn out. You can check the condition of the clutches, evaluate several indirect indicators that accurately convey the overall picture. The parasitic moment in the open state is estimated, which indicates mechanical problems of the box or excessively thick oil. The actuation pressure of the clutches is also checked, which can indirectly indicate their wear. The current of the linear solenoids for engaging the clutches and adjusting the base pressure, and adaptation data, which makes it possible to draw conclusions about the state of the control system and the stock of adjustments. The older 6-speed DQ250 is simpler than the DQ500. It has a noticeably weaker mechanical part, which leads to much more widespread problems with breakdowns of differentials and shaft bearings. There are also a lot of magnets in this box. There are both on the internal filter and on the forks, but the weak differential supplies a lot of chips. The ball bearing of the input shaft from SKF often failed, and the rest come with plastic cages, so they are afraid not only of wear but also of overheating. There were also childhood illnesses, in the form of wear on the oil pump cover with runs of 150 plus, a long-term operation with dirty oil, and a small resource of oil seals, most likely also due to dirty oil. Corrosion of the mechatronics cover is already an accidental nuisance. The shafts are quite weak. The small gears of the input shafts wear out strongly. The large wet does not save, which, with dirty oil, only helps the wear. The shift forks do not break here, although the bearing design is the same as the early DQ500 and DQ200 for that matter, and is potentially dangerous for the transmission if it collapses. Of the advantages in comparison with the DQ500, less weight, size and cost. And now, the 250th DSG can be bought almost cheaper than the 200th box, but it is still capable of withstanding motors with a capacity of 400 forces, and in general, with proper maintenance, it is very, very reliable. Especially if you are not too lazy and put a reinforced differential, better with a self-block. There are such options for the DQ250, and the price is not exorbitant, since the product is massive. Four-wheel drive is implemented by an angular gearbox on the gearbox and the Haldex 4-type coupling until November 2013, and after Haldex 5. The manufacturer recommends servicing the coupling every 60,000 kilometers, but in fact this is the maximum mileage. The pump will not say thank you for sure. With active winter operation, even if the oil is changed every 30,000, it will be dirty, saturated with clutch wear products and pump wear products. Moreover, only the filter itself and the oil are regularly changed. Cleaning the pump mesh is not included in the regulations. In practice, this is also very useful to do. By the way, it is convenient to squeeze out the filter in the fourth Haldex by activating the clutch pump with a scanner. You can break off the case with pilers and leave a bunch of plastic in the system. Serving the fifth Haldex is easier and more convenient, but it needs to be done even more often. It does not have a hydro accumulator, and pump wear is much more intense. As a result, the oil ages faster, and the reaction time of the system increases greatly with millage. With the same regulations, it is better to cut the real millage between oil changes in the clutch by half. Only if you change it at each maintenance, it will be relatively clean, and the reaction time of the clutch will be close to the new one. When replacing every 20,000 on typical winter operation in 2.0 engines, the oil is saturated with dust. For the fifth Haldex, there are already tuning kits with an external filter and an oil reservoir. The oils for different generations of Haldex differ, and the original is quite expensive, €25 for 800 ml. If you search, you can find analogs with tolerances for Haldex much cheaper. In general, there are no serious general problems, except for the density of the layout and the complexity of the units. The motors themselves are very compact, but the volume of attachments is quite large, so the engine compartment, which could fit both VR6 and even R5, is a little cramped here. And the complexity also implies the high cost of engines and attachments. There is a huge number of elements that the owners of Japanese aspirated engines with simple injection have not even heard of. The relatively small resource of engine mounts and their strong influence on the level of comfort is rather a feature, as well as the tight layout of the cooling system with indispensable on machines of this class of quick detachable couplings, which creates the first difficulties already up to 5 years of operation. Some attention should be paid to the presence of tuning and other improvements, as well as the firmware versions and all attachments. There can be a lot of improvements. Not only firmware, but all sorts of custom pipes, inlet, outlet, and so on. The bulk of the Tiguan gasoline engines are various versions of the 2.0 TSI engines of the EA888 family, as well as 1.4 TSI engines represented by two families, EA111 and EA211. Moreover, the first is also divided into options with a simple turbine and with a double supercharging, which differ greatly from each other. Of course, the EA888 family is also not homogeneous. Representatives of the Gen 1 and Gen 2 families were installed on the Tiguan. They are only limitedly compatible. Diameters of the crankshaft journals, the thickness of the cylinder block walls, high-pressure fuel pumps, vacuum pumps, oil pumps, and control units differ. Since 2.0 TSI motors are most popular, let's start with them. At the moment, the number of Gen 2 engines that have received an updated piston engine has grown significantly. On average, the cost of overhaul with the replacement of the timing and pistons with the recommended ones and the elimination of problems with the camshaft support usually fits into 1,500 to 1,700 euros. The number of copies where you can make very cheap repairs by drilling the oil drain holes in the piston has dropped to near zero. Strongly used motors cannot be repaired like that. They will have uneven wear on both the piston and the liner, and not just the piston rings. Of course, enthusiasts are trying, and some workshops even put the bore for the oil scraper ring on steam. But the quality of such repairs will not clearly be unsatisfactory, and given the price of even a minimal set of spare parts in the form of gaskets, it is also not economically viable. Unless the garage masters will leave all the old gaskets, put everything they can on the sealant, they will not change the oil seals and the entire timing. Doing this for sale got the hang of it. If you see the price of overall in 30,000 rubles, then this is just such a case. The task of the buyer in this case is to find such a high quality repair in time. Sometimes the oil appetite of engines, even within a successful piston group, is treated without capital, or it can be at least seriously reduced to quite reasonable 200 to 300 milliliters per 1,000 kilometers using decarbonization. But the trouble is that folk methods with dimethium are not suitable for the motor. It has a patented timing case cover and a very weak oil pressure sensor, and the dimethium chain dampers are afraid to laminate. but less aggressive drugs can quite successfully return the mobility of the piston rings. Only first you need to flush the intake and combustion chambers with water supply, change the valve stem seals, and revise the VCG and the tubing. There are a lot of examples of successful decaulking, although it is not suitable as a guaranteed recovery method. And no one gives guarantees even after successful decaulking, since all the prerequisites for caulking remain. They are incorporated in the design. Otherwise, the EA888 has the same set of problems. The first generation gives a lot of trouble to the timing belt if it is not completely replaced. Problems with balance aligners and camshaft support, phase regulator, and seizure of the camshaft bed are uncommon. There are many minor problems with the injection system, ventilation of crankcase, gases, and with supercharging. Turbines could already roll out most of their resource, and already the chances of breakdowns have grown greatly. With runs of 150 plus, the motors should already have at least a replaced timing belt with modifications, removed balancing shafts, often with the replacement of the camshaft with an eaten-up injection pump drive, the injection pump itself, replaced fuel rails or pressure sensors, and in the Russian hinterland with low fuel quality, also a pump, low pressure and nozzles. Hot parts of the turbines have almost certainly been replaced or require replacement due to cracks around the wastage valve and burnouts. Usually, a bracket is also placed on the wastegate actuated to eliminate rattling. However, this tuning is popular even with low mileage. For a motor that does not consume oil and has no other problems, now the cost of replacing the timing belt is 120 to 150 euros, and the price of spare parts is 220 to 250. In specialized turnkey service, it can come out in 300 and even a little less. So the large discrepancy in the positions of the camshafts recorded by the diagnostic scanner is just a reason for bargaining. Another of the regular and non-critical breakdowns is the pump. Its plastic case cracks before the bearings wear out. Usually the original is about 80 to 100,000 kilometers, and then regular replacements of non-originals begin. Even Hapu and Pierrebourg have complaints about reliability. By the way, the impeller itself with the bearing can be bought separately, but the problem is precisely in the pump housing, which also contains a thermostat. Unfortunately, there are no metal cases for these motors yet. Replacing the oil separator and crankcase ventilation valve is essentially a maintenance part for owners of cars with 2.0 TSI, as well as regular monitoring of the condition of the pump washer roller. The 1.4 TSI engines of the EA111 family, which were usually scolded a few years ago, are now experiencing a kind of renaissance. Spare parts have fallen in price, and particular timing components, a new front cover and even a piston group. And finally, a decent operating experience has been accumulated. As a result, a 122 horsepower CAXA with a single supercharging, if serviced by an experienced locksmith, can be generally considered a strong enough engine, and the problems are inexpensively solvable, even with a little tuning. If the timing belt of the last sample, the state of the intercooler and the electric pump is monitored, gasoline is poured 98th or 100th, and they do not try to save on oil and the intervals for its replacement, then these engines turn out to be more economical in operation than Korean, Japanese large atmospheric engines with a capacity of 150 plus horses. And in terms of dynamics in most modes, they are surpassed. The resource as a whole, of course, is moderate, 350,000 in the piston group during normal operation, but they lend themselves well to repair, and as long as the power system is in good working order, no scuffing. Even with a manual gearbox, such a motor easily gives out an average consumption in Moscow within 8 liters, and on the highway you can keep within 5 if you use cruise control correctly. Until 2015, a 150 horsepower version of the EA111 engine with double supercharging went on Tiguan. There is a relatively large turbine. At low revs, the motor is pressurized with a Roots compressor. This combination allows for good low RPM response and high power from the large turbine. But the complexity of such a solution is obvious. The intake tract is switched between the two compressors using dampers, and even using a simple air-to-air intercooler does not make the system simpler and more reliable. But the saddest thing is that the timing and piston group are not ready for such power. For a typical owner who does not bother with good gasoline and frequent maintenance, the engine will consume liters of oil, the pistons will burn out after that, and the chain will jump. There were a lot of such engines on the Tiguan, and the fame about them went very bad. Most likely, the problems with jumping have now been resolved, and the overall most likely was done if the engine was with an oily appetite. But this engine requires a high level of service culture, and for a mass family car, especially a heavy and big head crossover, it is not good enough. The average load is too high. You can buy a Tiguan with such a motor only when you fully understand how complex and demanding such a system is. And even with a low fuel consumption, you are unlikely to get serious savings. But for enthusiasts, this is a rather interesting engine, with a tax of 150 forces for motors before restyling. If you make a major overhaul with the installation of a forged piston and a reduced compressor pulley with an increased intercooler, you can get more than sufficient 200 to 240 HP, with very low fuel consumption and acceptable reliability, and without all the troubles of the EA888 family motors with timing and balances. The Tiguan also has two 1.4 TSI engines of the next EA211 family. CZDB engine with 125 HP is rare. It was installed from May 2014 to the very end of the issue. It does not have the problems of the early engines of this family with an oil appetite and is objectively the most reliable engine on the Tiguan in general, while the most inexpensive to maintain. Let's add here the IHIRHF3 turbine with a very good performance margin. It was installed on both 150 horsepower and 160 horsepower versions, and firmware for 95th gasoline. And there is no cylinder shutdown system. The timing is simple here. The only troubles are the capricious electric turbine actuator and the weak gaskets of the pump casing, which, fortunately, is metal by itself. CZDA engine with a power of 150 HP. It differs from CZDB mainly in firmware. It is more sensitive to fuel quality, and due to the use of DSG, it is generally always more loaded. In general, it also remains very reliable and inexpensive to operate, but driven motors of this family are also found. This is not surprising. On the internet, you can easily find convinced fans of 90-second gasoline, supporters of oil changes strictly according to the regulations, lovers of very strange oils and fuels at reduced prices. A big plus for the buyer is the choice. There are many cars with such motors, so the trash can be cut off. Its fuel consumption is just as ridiculous, and the dynamics already confidently allows it to drive less than 10 seconds up to 100. And in terms of the totality of characteristics, this is the most successful engine on this car. On cars before restyling, a diesel engine could be chosen in order to get a sufficiently powerful and at the same time reliable engine without an oil appetite. In addition, the 140 horsepower version was equipped with the usual Aisin automatic transmission, which added to its popularity. So basically, diesel cars are represented by EA189 engines and in the 2.0 and 140 HP version. Series CDAB or CFWB, all other diesels are extremely rare. Their turbines are strong. The hexagon of the oil pump drive also does not wear out. The only risk group is that the first engines of 2009 were delivered, they were not officially supplied to us before. And since November 2009, the motors have modernized oil pump and 100mm hexagon of the drive. The nozzles are usually alive here as long as the injection pump is alive and there are no overheating, up to about 250 to 300,000 mAh. Two booster pumps are also strong, as long as the diesel fuel is good and the filters are replaced. The crankcase ventilation system with 4 microcyclones filters the oil with exemplary reliability. The EGR valve is located after the DPF filter and is equipped with a gas cooling system. As a result, it can work efficiently and does not heavily pollute the intake. With pre-diesel firmware, this is a really good engine. It's a pity, many of them received a forced update. As a result, they lost their normal dynamics, got an extra 2 liters of fuel consumption, and, at the same time, a lot of problems with EGR valve wear. Clogged intake, manifold flap wedge, tubing wear, including a hot snail, and, on European imported cars, also with a constantly clogged particulate filter. At the same time, the update itself could go through with a bunch of errors, because, in addition to updating the software, these series of motors had to change some series of nozzles, install dividers or dampers in the inlet, and recalibrate the tubings. And additional work was not always done. Alas, it is not possible to roll back software updates in standard online mode. In general, the motor is more reliable than the E8888 gasoline engines, but at the cost of operation it is now difficult to make preference. With low mileage, it is definitely better than all gasoline ones, except for E8211, but if the mileage is 200 plus and the firmware is new, then the situation may be reversed. It brakes less often, consumes less fuel, but with high mileage, typical for diesel engines, it can cause a lot of problems, and the solution can be more expensive than typical gasoline overall. With a thorough diagnosis, this is not a problem, but the scanner cannot see the full picture, and no seller will allow you to disassemble the inlet. On this, information about the problems of the Volkswagen Tiguan is exhausted. If you know more, or do not agree with what you heard, I'm waiting for you in the comments.